Well, dear ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, a very good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, wherever in the world you're joining us from for this special virtual event, the Asia Pacific Transport Forum. My name is Sharanjit Lail, and it is a privilege to be your moderator for this opening plenary entitled Accelerating and Transformative Decarbonized Transport. Now, the Transport Forum is hosted by the ADB every 2 years and brings together transport experts from around the region alongside sector stakeholders. Now, given the key challenges of the transport sector, some topics are common every forum, and these include the relationship between climate change and transport, urban transport concerns such as urban mass transit, and how transport impacts regional connectivity and cross-border trade. Well, in today's opening session, we will be looking at the future of transport and decarbonization in the face of the main transport challenges and opportunities in Asia against the context of COVID and international agreements. Well, to welcome you all to the forum, I'd like to introduce the Managing Director General of the ADB, Woo Chong. And in this important role, he is responsible for ensuring the bank's coherence on key initiatives and issues and provides oversight to many of the bank's crucial functions. Over to you, Managing Director
Thank you, Sharanjit. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay. Perfect. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Asian Development Bank, I would like to welcome you to the Asia and the Pacific Transport Forum 2022. I understand we have many incredibly eminent speakers and guests who are joining this forum, but I would like to give a special thanks to Sharanjit, my friend, who's making this very, very special event. And the only thing I regret is I don't get to see you in person this time again. Hopefully the next time I can do that in person. So we've been holding a transport forum for every 2 years since 2008. From a small beginnings with less than 100 people, we grew to over 800 participants at the last in-person event in 2018. In 2020, at the height of the pandemic, we had more than 1,000 attendees through the virtual event. Now this year, hopefully the last one in the COVID-19 pandemic era, ADB is hosting the Asia and the Pacific Transport Forum virtually as transport challenges and opportunities in our fast-changing world. Since the last Transport Forum 2 years ago, we have seen an unprecedented change in how the global people understand the transport and mobility. While the pandemic recovery is well underway, impact is still felt or unable to travel. It has been a very challenging, to say the least. I wonder if you can take a quick survey of the participants at this forum to see how many times all of us collectively experienced those very pleasant nose swabs for the essential travel that we had to endure in the past 2 years. For the COP26 event last year in Glasgow, I remember going through about 20 PCR and antigen tests over a period of 1 week, and somehow successfully recording 100% negative test result, which enabled him to come back home safely. Despite these challenges, we are also seeing a lot of opportunities to transform for better and more sustainable transport in the post-pandemic era, and an opportunity to reimagine the future of mobility. While the pandemic impacts must be acknowledged, they need to be seen as part of a wider vision and part of a long-term strategy for transport. A strategy that aligns with the international agreements, such as the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement. Of course, we all have to focus on the need to decarbonize the transport sector. I strongly believe that these issues are not mutually exclusive, and continuing to address the pandemic impacts while delivering on the wider long-term vision is possible and should be pursued. In this context, the theme of this year's Asia Pacific Transport Forum is Accelerating Sustainable and Decarbonized Transport. I would like to briefly touch upon 4 fundamental dimensions that will be at the center of the discussions of the forum. First, the transport should provide access to all and do so in a most inclusive manner. Inclusiveness is fundamental to development, whether it's access to education, to health services, or to economic opportunities. That's why it's one of the 4 pillars of our strategy 2030. Transport is a means to an end. Although transport may not have a standalone sustainable development goal like some of the other sectors, transport makes a meaningful contribution to 8 of the SDGs. When it comes to access, data shows that 630 million people have inadequate rural access, and 1.4 billion people, or 61% of the urban population, lack good access to public transport. While providing access, transport must be sustainable. Transport is clearly broader than just getting people or goods from point A to point B. We define sustainable transport as accessible, affordable, environmentally friendly, economically and financially sound, as well as safe. Safety includes road crashes, road fatalities, and injuries, but as well as people perception and use, particularly important for the gender dimension of the inclusivity. Now let us acknowledge that transport activities are growing in the region and will continue to grow. In the meantime, data shows that compared to the global average, transport in Asia is characterized by a large infrastructure deficit, a low level of access, high cost transportation, low but fast growing vehicle ownership, and high levels of emission. There are some notable aspects of transport in Asia. Our region accounts for 97% of total e-vehicles worldwide, primarily because of the dominance of the two-wheelers and three-wheelers. This is an area where the region leads the world in decarbonization of the transport sector. Those are some of the facts supported by the Asian Transport Outlook, ATO database, which is developed and kept updated by the Asian Development Bank and its partners. It is used to inform a greater understanding of the sector and review and monitor how the region performs against a series of transport indicators at both at the country and city level. The ATO will be widely used to inform the discussion in these forum sessions. The database is open source and accessible on the ADB online library. The infrastructure deficit in our region requires additional funding of about 2.4% of the GDP. It's obvious that bridging the infrastructure funding gap requires a collective effort by governments, development partners, and private sector. Looking at it as a half full glass rather than half empty, this deficit can be seen as an opportunity. We are still in the early stages of development in many parts of the region, and any good decision to influence the future of transport can have a positive impact at scale. Transport must address its negative externalities, such as the congestion, emissions, and road crashes. And we see very promising initiatives around transport decarbonization and improved road safety being developed in the region. The alignment of transport projects with Paris Agreement has become a central question, and strong commitment to have been made by governments and all development partners. Road safety is also a growing public health concern globally and regionally, and requires increased attention aligned with the UN second decade of action on road safety. Let us keep in mind more than 2,000 people lose their lives on the road crashes in the region every day, and many more sustain serious life-changing injuries. Many of these crash victims are the family income earners, so you can imagine the dire consequences for their families. So the social and economic loss must stop now, once and for all. The Transport Forum's 2022 evolves around 5 main areas, which we are pleased to discuss with our partners and broader stakeholders. First is transport decarbonization. Second, accessible, safe, and inclusive transport. Third is innovations and knowledge solutions. Fourth is quality infrastructure investments. And fifth is sustainable transport by 2030. These topics are consistent with the ADB Strategy 2030, its operational priorities, and the directions being refined and discussed for the ADB support in the transport sector. Let us take this opportunity to openly discuss the contributions of transport to our shared vision to a prosperous, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable Asia and the Pacific. My fourth and the last point is on fostering knowledge and innovation. It is obvious that transition is already happening, and very innovative projects and programs have been developed in the region. These need to be replicated at scale down. ADB would like to assist governments develop total solutions for transport and mobility. So I would like to highlight 5 examples of innovation and trend-setting projects from our region. First is the Integrated Bus Rapid Transit BRT corridor in Peshawar. It provides people-centric urban transport. It's about moving people, not vehicles. Second is Bishkek Electric Buses and Transport Infrastructure Enhancement Project in Kyrgyz Republic. It contributes to the sector decarbonization and improves quality and reduces carbon emissions and traffic congestion. Third is at a larger scale, actions for improved road safety through the region are being supported by the Asia Pacific Road Safety Observatory. It raises awareness at all levels and setting new standards and ambitions. ADB is a major funder and the secretariat for the observatory. Fourth is the Regional Road Development and Maintenance Project in Mongolia. This is building climate and disaster resilience while providing institutional strengthening for road maintenance. And the last one is the Land and Marine Connectivity Project in Solomon Islands. The project improves accessibility, efficiency, disaster resilience of transportation network. And there are so many more innovative projects and initiatives to get inspiration from our region. So let me conclude by noting that we are probably in the middle of the greatest transformation in transport to ever take place. The pandemic gave us a glimpse into the world that prioritized pedestrian travel and non-motorized options. As I drive today to the office in Manila, as more vehicles are coming to the road, I increasingly notice the bicycle riders, the pedestrians on the road, and we must give priority right away to those people so that they can travel better. And it also gives us the stark reminder that all transport planning must focus on sustainable options and mainstream disaster preparedness and resilience in its design. The International Climate Agenda calls for an accelerated change towards decarbonization, and transport must become smarter and better able to keep pace with a future that is always changing. This is our responsibility so that our children and their children can live on a planet which is as good as the one we live on now. Once again and finally, I would like to emphasize that the COVID-19 pandemic recovery and the delivery on the international agreements are not mutually exclusive. In fact, they both stimulate the drastic shift to sustainable transport and the transport transformation we are collectively committed to achieve by 2030 and beyond. We hope that this event can give the transport community a space to help define transport for a better future. I wish you productive discussion in coming days. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that, Managing Director General Woo Cheong. Always great to see you too, and so exciting to hear about some of those ADB-led projects in Mongolia, the Solomon Islands, and of course we'll be hearing a little bit more about the one in Peshawar in Pakistan today as well. Well, next I'd like to introduce Ken O'Flaherty. He's the UK's COP26 Regional Ambassador to Asia Pacific and South Asia. Now, in this video message to us, he'll touch on the key messages of COP26 and the UK's plans to transform transport. Please play the video.
Hello and greetings from London. It's a pleasure to be speaking to you today at the Asia and the Pacific Transport Forum 2022. I've been asked to say a few words about UK plans to transform transport and key messages from COP26 in this area. Transforming transport is an integral part of the UK's plans to decarbonise our economy. In July last year, we published the Transport Decarbonisation Plan, which sets the transport sector on the path to net zero by 2050, in line with the Paris Agreement. This is the biggest piece of work we've ever done to tackle greenhouse gas emissions from transport. The plan takes a holistic and a cross-modal approach, and it sets out a credible and ambitious path for the sector. The plan includes world-leading ambition on many fronts. There's significant policy proposals regarding phase-out dates for the sale of new non-zero emission road vehicles, improvements to public transport, and increased support for active travel, committing to a net zero emission rail network, and ambitious commitments to decarbonise our aviation and maritime sectors. Decarbonisation will rely on future transport technology coupled with the necessary behavioural and societal change, and this plan delivers what is needed. It's genuinely high ambition, technically and feasibly, for all areas of transport. Achieving 100% zero emissions on our roads will remove the source of over 90% of the UK's domestic transport emissions. And of course, COP26 in Glasgow last November made significant global progress on transforming transport. As COP26 presidency, we have been technology neutral, but not outcome neutral. We need zero emission road transportation to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in line with the goals of the Paris Agreement, but we also need to clean up our air. Speeding up the global transition to zero-emission vehicles, or ZEVs, is a key element of the UK COP26 presidency's coal, cars, cash and trees ambition. So our zero-emission vehicles campaign was a top priority for our COP president, Alok Sharma. Our primary objective for Transport Day was to demonstrate that the transition to zero-emission road transport technology has reached a tipping point. It's now inevitable, it's underway, and through collaborative action, it's accelerating. We were successful in showcasing increased global momentum and UK leadership to speed up the transition to zero-emission vehicles. That's vital to keep the 1.5 degrees Celsius warming target within reach. As of the 3rd of December, 39 countries, 6 major vehicle manufacturers, GM, Ford, Mercedes, BYD, Volvo and JLR, 46 cities, states and regions, 28 fleets and 13 investors all jointly set out their determination for all new car and van sales to be zero emission by 2040 globally and 2035 in leading markets. Not only will this keep us on track to reach our Paris Agreement goals, but it will also create new opportunities for clean growth, green jobs, and improved air quality right across the globe. We also worked to build the International Aviation Climate Ambition Coalition. 25 countries, representing over half of global aviation emissions, have committed to work through the International Civil Aviation Organization, or ICAO, to support increased ambition and action in tackling aviation emissions. That includes working together to secure an ambitious long-term ambition for international aviation emissions at the 41st ICAO Assembly this year. States have also committed to working to strengthen ICAO's existing climate measures, as well as taking their own steps to roll out new, cleaner technology and sustainable fuels. Declaration comes at the beginning of a year of intensive negotiations on aviation emissions, leading to a decision this autumn on aviation's contribution to the Paris Agreement. And a third major outcome of COP26 was the Clydebank Declaration for green shipping corridors. 22 countries committed to support the establishment of green shipping corridors, zero-emission shipping routes between 2 ports. This will involve deploying zero-emission vessel technologies and putting alternative fuel and charging infrastructure in place in ports to allow for zero-emission shipping on key routes across the globe. Signatories include countries from every continent, major economies, developing countries, and significant flag states. The UK remains COP26 president this year in the run-up, of course, to COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh. In 2022, we want to capitalise and build on the impressive progress made on driving forward the global transition to ZEVs through the Zero Emission Vehicles Transition Council 2022 Action Plan and decarbonising the hard-to-abate aviation and maritime sectors through our ongoing work with ICAO and the IMO. Accelerating the transition to ZEVs and decarbonising aviation and maritime needed global collective action. COP26 was a defining moment to push this forward, and we very much hope that our friends and our partners in the Asia-Pacific region will help us to further build momentum throughout 2022. Thank you very much.
And that was Ken O'Flaherty speaking there, and I'm sure you heard him loud and clear in that video message, some really insightful points as well. Well, now we can move on to our session with our panel of experts that we've been promising you, and I'd like to introduce them. We have, of course, Dr. Yong-Tae Kim, the Secretary General of the International Transport Forum. He was elected by the transport ministers of ITF member countries in 2017. And prior to this, Dr. Kim distinguished himself in the civil service of his native career, serving as a Director General in the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport. We also have Muhammad Jahanzeb Khan, the Deputy Chairman from the Planning Commission and Ministry of Planning from Pakistan. He has more than 35 years of experience in public service and has held key leadership positions in the federal and provincial government of Pakistan. And then we also have Ricardo Menendez March, a member of parliament for the Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand, who is Mexican born and a New Zealand activist and politician who has since 2020 has been a member of parliament for the Green Party there. And we have Xia Hong Yang, is the ADB's Chief Thematic Officer of its Sustainable Development and Climate Change Department. She had also served as the ADB's Country Director for Pakistan, where she led the ADB's operational knowledge and partnership efforts to building up key infrastructure there. And finally, we have Jae Hak Oh, the President of the Korea Transport Institute, which is an organization he's been a key part of since 1992, having project managed more than 70 of Koti's transport projects. Well, welcome to you all. It's great to see you. And of course, I'm going to start with the same opening question to all of you about the future of transport and the transformations you've all seen in this sector against the context of COVID that we've been speaking of, and as well the developments we've heard about from COP26 and climate change. So my question to you all is, how do you all envision the transformation of transport from its current state? Well, let's start with you, Dr. Kim, the Secretary General of ITF.
Thank you, Shanjit. Good morning from Paris. As the only global body that covers all transport modes, the ITF can bring value to countries by supporting different transport goals and visions, and especially through the ITF's program of work and policy analysis, research capacity, and extensive network of experts and stakeholders. We hope that greater engagement with countries will help us serve the needs of future transport goals in a time of change and disruption, especially since global passenger and freight transport demand will continue to grow across all modes. The ITF remains committed to carry forward the global policy dialogue for better transport and to help governments build an evidence-based policy framework for better decisions in these difficult and uncertain times. I'm also looking forward to continuing our collaboration with the ADB and to foster the collection and sharing of knowledge and lessons learned and experience to support the transformation of the transport sector. My 5 priority topics at the ITF include accessibility, connectivity, decarbonization, digitalization, and safety and security. The various research analysis, initiatives, and policy dialogues have been developed for each of these topics, drawing upon the ITF's vast network of stakeholders and partners. For example, in order to address transport and climate change, we launched the ITF Decarbonizing Transport Initiative in 2016 after the signing of the Paris Agreement. This initiative was developed with quantitative analysis in its core, which supports the development of an inclusive global policy dialogue on transport and climate change. Together with more than 70 partners, we are helping governments and industry transform their climate ambitions into action. Over the past 5 years, we have built a catalog of effective CO2 mitigation measures, also known as Transport Climate Action Directory, TCAT, which provides policymakers with a catalog of transport decarbonization measures that have been reviewed for their effectiveness. There are currently more than 80 measures in TCAT, including mitigation measures for hard-to-abate sectors such as aviation, maritime, and road freight transport. We have also gathered and shared evidence for best practices that will accelerate the transition to carbon neutral mobility through in-depth sectoral studies on urban passenger transport, road freight transport, maritime transport, aviation, and interurban transport. The numerous focus studies ranging from shared mobility, zero carbon supply chains, to resilience technology transition have also been published. So our initiative has provided targeted analytical assistance for countries to identify priority decarbonization transport policies through the development of city, national, or regional pathways for stakeholders, ranging from city of Bogota to European unions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Kim. And we can move on to Muhammad Jahanzeb Khan now for the view from Pakistan.
Well, thank you very much for this invitation and opportunity to speak at this very important forum. Pakistan, as you know, has a large population, almost 220 million people. We've got more than a dozen major cities. And that makes transportation critically important. It's a long country, and to the length and breadth of the country is the need to transport people and goods. And the key challenge is that we don't have an integrated transport system, and we have a very scant public transport system, particularly in the urban areas. The usual problems, we have congestion, environmental degradation, economic losses, the labor market is not accessible. Students, women, those with limited mobility, all have issues availing transport. The last decade or so, we have introduced some mass transit systems, and these were in various cities of the country. We have buses, rapid transit buses, light rails. We also have buses which are run by electricity and hybrid, experimenting one with biogas in Karachi. And the key challenges there have been how to optimize these bus rapid transit systems, how to integrate them with the feeding routes, and how to optimize and finance these infrastructure facilities. I think I must mention Shohan is a great contribution. I look forward to hearing from her regarding the Peshawar bus rapid transit system, which perhaps has a uniqueness that has feeding routes, and it's also hybrid, draws wind electricity, and this is a new model for urban transportation for us. We also have in Lahore, which is a very large city, more than a 10 million population. We have Chinese support and assistance, an orange metro line, and that is another experience that we'd like to present and see how it has shaped the transportation system for the city. Very recently, we have approved the Karachi Circular Railway, which used to be there some decades back actually, but fell into disuse. And now we are reinstating it. And this is a public-private partnership. It's a large infrastructure project that we invited private sector to help us do this. The railways in Pakistan have been generally neglected. It has not received the investment that was required. It is largely in the public sector. We're also working with the Chinese to see how we can rebuild what we call the main line 1, which is the main infrastructure from north to south, and to bring it to higher speed, say about 160 km/h, and to also use rail as the foremost means of transportation and freight carriage. The air transport is not competitive here. It's not accessible to the large sections of the population, and its coverage is also limited. Now, the topic for the conference about how do we look at sustainable transport and transformative effect of transportation. I think there are a couple of thoughts that I'll just lay before this very distinguished audience. Clearly, the need to decarbonize the transport system is one of the commitments that we also are wedded to. The national determined contribution at the climate conference, we have stated that 30% of the vehicles in Pakistan will be electric by 2030. This is also stated in our electric vehicle policy, which also has some similar aspirations. So clearly we are moving in that direction. Now, rapid transport systems, as I mentioned, are trying with biogas and hybrid electricity, as well as looking at new ways of finding less carbon emissions and more environmentally compliant fuels. Kavit, I think, has been mentioned. Let me present to you this perspective that transport cannot be looked at as a sector. I think the Managing Director General mentioned this in terms of the overall development of society and economy. The transport sector is not an end in itself, it's a means. So how would the future look like with this perspective of COVID? I think we also need to look at the need to have more decentralized ways of working. The digital infrastructure is also another means of transportation. Can help people move information very quickly, can work from home. And this should help lessen some of the pressure on these big urban metropolis. So we also need to factor that in. And we are very deeply committed, and we have a long way to go. Yeah, there's so much need in Pakistan for transport sector development. Very conservative estimate is that we need about, by 2030, we need to have 30 cities come under transport plan, master plan. At least about $5 billion need to be invested just to do the plans that we have ahead of us. So thank you very much, ADB. We look forward to working with you to see how we can manage this very important objective with your technical support, with your financial support, and with knowledge management that you are organizing. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for that, Muhammad Jahanzeb Khan, for that view from Pakistan. We can now move on to the ADB's Xiaohong Yang, who obviously had a lot of experience too in Pakistan, and will tell us a bit about some of those exciting projects that the Managing Director General told us about earlier. Xiaohong, over to you.
Thank you, moderator. Thank you, Janzab. I recall our days when I was country director. Janzab was managing the big provinces, Punjab provinces planning commission chairperson, and later on he's now managing the national planning deputy chairman. Thank you for seeing you over the screen. As our MDG just mentioned, actually in ADB we have very good track record in the transport sector. We have been doing really well, very well. So nowadays we are focusing really on sustainable transport, alignment with Paris alignment and SDGs that within the SDG lens we are working on. So thanks to the strong growth in our region, so we have enjoyed very strong support from DMC counterparts. You can see from Chairman's speech a while ago, 30 cities trying to get our support. So we do enjoy very, very long-term engagement with our DMCs, development member countries. So we also engaged, especially in transport sector, not just at the national level, but also we engage at national level and also local community level. And then we have very strong operations at all fronts, and both sovereign side, non-sovereign side, as well as PPP side, our public-private partnership operations. So, and today I would like to focus on we at MDB, Multilateral Development Bank, we can do a lot. So first of all, I want to touch upon about innovative financing. So on the challenging side, we can see now the impact of COVID-19 has left very little physical space to address the huge infrastructure gaps, including transport. So we know for the fact that the government is still the biggest financer for infrastructure, especially transport. However, the infrastructure priorities are not on the top of the government priorities nowadays. It's not because they don't want to, but because of the debt sustainability concern. And our transport people, especially, need to work very closely with the finance and governance people to address the debt issues in many of our countries. And also we need to think about build back better, how we can actually work closer with government to come up with innovative financing. MDB, especially ADB, is quite good at that, raising more public, private, even we are reaching now to philanthropists capital to really helping us to mobilize innovative financing to tackle the climate change and infrastructure gaps. ADB management has put this innovative financing as a top priority. Second, I'd like to highlight the importance of policies and institutions. So we need really to have the most critical variable policies and institutions in place. This is becoming more and more important, especially in countries where the public transport and no carbon transport is not really having a very good framework. And regulatory framework is lacking transparency, and there's also political stability issue. To remove these uncertainties, we need really to have good policy and regulations in place, no matter who is staying in power. Otherwise, who will invest hundreds of millions, billions of dollars to infrastructure projects, and assuming they are going to run very well? So we do see our transport project people need to work closely together with the policy and institutions people to find solutions nowadays in each country. So to support build back better, build back greener policies and institutional reforms through, we call it PBLs, the policy-based lending, and loans based on results. So these alternative financing instruments like PBLs and RBLs could really help us to support more aggressive reforms, promote renewables, and low carbon transport passes. And then why we at the project officer can do actually a lot of upstream support for policy reforms, country directors, sector directors, and the leaders in ADB could also help to do more frequent upstream support face-to-face discussions with government to actually supplement those reforms with projects 2 to 3 years after to really implement some demonstration projects, and also working on technical assistance to build a capacity and institutions. Over back to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Xia Hongyang, for those insights. Really fascinating there. We hope to learn a lot more from you. Now, next I can go to Ricardo Menendez-March. She's New Zealand's Green Party, as I mentioned before. We'd love the view from New Zealand.
Thank you, Sharanjit, and kia ora koutou and warm Pacific greetings to my fellow panelists and attendees. Before I begin sharing reflections on building an inclusive transport system that enables our communities to participate, I want to acknowledge the work of my colleague, the Honourable Julianne Genter, who last term in government was Associate Minister for Transport, and her work laid the foundations on things like the Land Transport Clean Vehicles Amendment Bill, which will help New Zealand stop being the dumping ground of the vehicle industry when it comes to polluting vehicles, and also managing to secure more funds for public transport and bike infrastructure. And it kind of shows the importance of having agents in government with the political will to transform our transport system. My background is a little bit more unorthodox in relationship to this area of transport. Before being a member of parliament, I used to work with unemployed and homeless people, and I directly saw the effects of inequitable policies that meant people weren't able to meet their cost of living. Equally, these people were also facing obligations that meant going to work seminars, go to house viewings, or other activities required resources that they didn't have. Which is why people came to NGOs to help meet the cost of food, but particularly the cost of transport. And what struck me over the years in a country like Aotearoa, New Zealand, was the fact that a lot of the assistance that we provided for people when it came to meeting the cost of transport came as a debt. When, for example, for things like food, it would be what we would call non-recoverable assistance. And the reality now is that despite the progress that we're making on addressing inequality, 500,000 New Zealanders owe money to government agencies amounting to over $1 billion, including for things like getting around. And so a lot of our communities live in public transport deprived neighborhoods, relying on cars. But even for those people who live in areas where there is public transport, cost remains a barrier for them to participate in their communities. At the moment, a lot of New Zealanders are facing high cost of living due to inflationary pressures reflected by global events. And right now, I'm in Parliament, and we're debating a couple of interventions that will help to alleviate this. One of them was effectively a fossil fuel subsidy of 25 cents a litre. And the other one is halving the cost of public transport fares for 3 months. And when the government announced this intervention, one of the things that struck me was the low cost of having discounts on public transport fares compared to, say, something like a subsidy for fossil fuels. It would basically be cheaper to provide half public transport fares for a whole year than provide the fossil fuel subsidy for 3 months. And what I also heard from the communities was the tangible excitement that people had at the prospect of having cheaper fares. And so, you know, for us, it's one of those things where we want the government to go further and faster to provide an inclusive public transport system. And that is why, alongside communities on the ground, part of what has happened in New Zealand is people have mobilized to get the government to apply this discount to things like intercity rail, as well as for people who require services that provide door-to-door transport for people who are disabled and who cannot independently use regular public transport services. And that is key to building an inclusive transport system, thinking about the people that perhaps often are left behind by the political mainstream. The exciting thing to close off is that our neighbor in Tasmania is trialing free fares for 5 months, and that will be an exciting opportunity to see the impacts on equity of having free fares. So on top of having things like frequent services, and in New Zealand where we're reviewing the ownership of public transport, addressing those equity issues, that means people are able to use public transport services, get to work, to school, and fully engage in their communities is key. So this is one of the things that I'm looking forward to exploring how cheaper fares in New Zealand impact those communities. Kia ora.
Thank you so much for that, Ricardo Menendez March there from New Zealand's Green Party, and a really interesting perspective about how transport impacts the underprivileged amongst various communities. Next, I can go to Jae-Hak Oh. He's the president of the Korea Transport Institute. What's the perspective from your end?
Hello, good to see you again in 2 years' time. Do you remember me?
Yes, of course. Always good to see you,
Yeah.
Jae-Hak.
I believe that transport transformation is the one of the most important national policy agenda, because the transportation transformation is important because of the national economy or industrial competitiveness, and also the people's quality of life as well. So for example, in the past, transport policy mostly very much depend on the infrastructure development, means the hardware development, and also the promotion of the public transportation service. But in the future transport might rely upon, depend on more the technology advance. For example, the hyper intelligence, or AI, or the hyperconnectivity, which is the Internet of Things, big data analysis, or the cloud computing, something like that. So because of the technology advance, now the transport services becomes more individual demand oriented, or the on-demand service became possible in the future, will be possible, already possible, or will be more better improved in the future. So in that sense, is the future of the transport will start with the technology innovation, I believe, something like this. Also, the transport transformation now is being directed through the three important axes of the technologies. First one is automation, which is the autonomous vehicles, the driverless the transportation, and also the drone, which is the point-to-point flight service, something like this. And the second one is the electrification, which is quite related to the decarbonized transportation. And the third axis is the sharing and the integration, which is much related to the platform connectivity technology, something like this, you see. So I believe the transport transformation is the very important for the future, for the national economy, and also the people's life as well. I think we also the future transport will bring about a lot of the positive or the negative impact as well. I think if I say the positive impact is quite related to we came to resolve some impacts, the externalities, caused by the motorizations. For example, the congestion problem, traffic congestion problem, traffic accident, and some the environment emission problems as well, something like this. I think it is possible now. We can solve mostly these externalities through the new technologies in transforming transportation, I think. But we also should be consider about the employment changes, which is very important for the people's everyday life. So I think because the transport transformation is related to the industrial change. Industrial change means the changes in the rapid changes in the employment, for example, in the automobile industry, or the mobility service industry as well, I think. So in general, the transportation transformation is a very complex process, which is quite integrated with the automobile manufacturing industry, infrastructure development, and the mobility service industry, technology innovation, various regulations, and also the financing capability as well. So in my research institute, our research is very much focusing on how to create the market-based ecology for transforming transportation. The ecology should be based on the people's consensus and the social agreement. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for that, Jae-Hak. Oh, and really interesting to hear about the new technological advances. We all know that within our lifetimes, many governments have already said they are banning fossil fuel vehicles. So hopefully we'll hear a lot more about that for these sessions coming up. Well, thank you all for this very insightful first part of our session. Now, before we go on to the next part of our session on decarbonization, I'd like to introduce this video produced by the ADB on the decarbonization journey that we're all currently on. Please play a video.
Let's not beat around the bush. The transport sector is responsible for 24% of global CO2 emissions from fuel combustion and rising. Asia's emissions are growing faster than anywhere else, with a 2.5-fold increase compared to just a 50% increase in the rest of the world. Transport is also a major contributor to poor air quality, with 76% of global deaths attributed to PM 2.5 in the region, caused by a mix of transport-related and industrial emissions. The combination of public health, environmental challenges, and climate change are all driving the need for transport energy system transformation. This includes better integration of low-carbon energy sources and energy efficiency. The good news is that Asia and the Pacific accounts for 97% of global e-vehicles. The growth in electric and plug-in hybrid cars is rapid. In 2017, there were 3 million vehicles. In 2020, there were 4.5 million, or 5% of global passenger car sales. By the 2030s, this is expected to reach 20% of global vehicle sales. However, electric passenger cars are only part of the picture in Asia, which also relies on 2- and 3-wheelers as well as public transport infrastructure. Over the next 20 to 40 years, the sector could
Now, what an interesting video there. It did end rather abruptly, but you can go online and watch more of it. It's really fascinating and a really excellent introduction to the next part of our discussion, which will look at the decarbonization efforts around the region with some concrete examples from our panelists. Now, first off, I can go back to Mohammad Jahanzeb Khan. Let's start with you. It was really fascinating to hear the perspective from Pakistan and the kind of strides that Pakistan has made. But can you talk us through the challenges of decarbonization in a developing country like Pakistan? How do you manage the transport energy nexus and clean the grid?
Well, thank you again for allowing me to contribute to this discussion. I mentioned briefly in my earlier intervention about the electric vehicle policy that we have, and as well as about our nationally determined contributions to the climate conference. Very mindful of the energy transport nexus. Separately on our energy mix, we are aspiring to rebalance it towards more renewables. That's one of the policy objectives the government of Pakistan is trying to achieve. I mentioned to you that the Lahore Orange Metro line is around electricity, and this was designed at a time when we had shortage of electricity. So it was seen as a very challenging enterprise, but we're managing it well. In Karachi, there are two lines. One is known as the green line, the other one is the red line. And these are, we also trying to use biogas, renewable fuel for running buses on this one of these lines. Mentioned already hybrids, and Bashar PRT were also a hybrid electricity come diesel mechanism. But challenge, of course, is that the infrastructure needs to be developed for this work. As I mentioned, that the supply of electricity was not there, but now we have reasonably good generation capacities, but transmission, distribution, and also to be able to run it uninterruptedly remains a challenge. For electric vehicles as well, the ability to have infrastructure which can provide them the necessary energy for a length of space is very important. It's also important that we realize that it is a very large section of the population cannot afford to buy this new technology, and therefore the need to have more public transport, for which we're very constrained by on the financing side to see how we can finance this public transport systems. 2 years are really exploded in Pakistan. A lot of people now use motorbikes, etc. 3 wheelers are also quite in use, and this would need to be reformed to see how we can build more on public transport, both in the urban areas as well as between cities. So my key concern is that while we're trying to decarbonize, how do we manage the domain in terms of technology, in terms of the transition from fossil fuels towards decarbonized transport system, towards the financing needs, the technological needs, and also to help people transit towards this, those who are already engaged in using transport, which is heavily reliant on fossil fuels. I did mention that these decarbonization efforts, particularly in the context of COVID, should also focus on how do we organize our habitations, living space and the workspace. There would be more and more opportunities for people to work remotely, and that needs to be formalized and put into good operation so that the need to transport is lessened. Also, with this ability to transport a lot of information and data through digital connectivity, we might have a different kind of freight services. Some of these things used to be sent through couriers and freights, and how we can reduce that. So I would suggest that we look at the decarbonization of transport in a larger sense, relating it to a different kind of work style and lifestyle, which would help us benefit from what we've learned in COVID, and also reduce urban sprawl and preserve rural life, which is also one of the dimensions that need to be brought in. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Jahanzeb Khan. They're really interesting what Pakistan is doing to try to decarbonize. Now, Dr. Kim, I can go to you now. We know that the ITF is the only global body that covers all transport modes. You have some 63 member countries, including advanced and emerging economies as part of that. So what are some of the key opportunities, do you think, for emerging economies to decarbonize based on ITF's policy analysis?
Thank you very much for the interesting question. In fact, it's the same problem for every country. Now, climate change is not limited to one country or a few countries in the world, and still many challenges exist. And especially, we have a very ambitious target that is related to the period up to 2050. And transport sector basically has a limited capacity in terms of the decarbonizing our society, because decarbonizing transport is a part of decarbonizing our society in general. So ITF now works with multiple stakeholders to go beyond the transport, especially to break the silos. If we only focus on transport sector, basically we cannot really reach our goals. So one example is a joint project developed with the United Nations World Tourism Organization, where we applied our modeling tools to evaluate transport-related CO2 emissions of the tourism sector and develop policy insights that reflect synergies between transport and tourism. And also, as I mentioned at the beginning, we launched the TCAT in July 2020, and that's also for helping emerging economies as well, because in most cases, in many countries, the policymakers have difficulty in implementing their policies. And at the last COP, where I was in November last year in Glasgow, I also heard a lot of slogans from ambition to action. Still, the same slogan is repeating all the time. And I think we launched the TCAT, as I mentioned at the beginning, Transport Climate Action Directorate, containing more than 80 the measures that government can use. And each measure provides quantifiable impact of the CO2 reductions. So basically, also based on my experience of working in the government, always we easily become normative and prescriptive and ideological, but in fact, how to reach the goal is a really challenging and very difficult task. So we need some clarity and quantifiable impact, because in the government, we know that in emerging economy as well, in advanced countries as well, there should be a well coordinated the mechanism in terms of the governance system. So for example, if we are convinced in the Ministry of Transport or transport community that we have to do this, basically we need to get some funding or budget from Ministry of Finance. And also we have to go to the parliament to get the real funding and approval by the representatives of the citizens. So basically we have to coordinate all these mechanisms inside the government. So I think especially in emerging economies, having a very smooth governance system to reach a goal and the commitment of each country is really important. And in that governance system, we can think about private sector and public sector. And even in the public sector, we have a central government and local government. And in the private sector, we have an industry and individuals. So basically, unless we work together in this governance system, we cannot really reach a national goal. And in the international level, it's also very important to share the best practices. And TCAT is an official reference, as I mentioned. It was endorsed by the UNFCCC, organizing COP every year. And at the last COP in Glasgow, we launched the first official transport ministers meeting there as a side event. And before, many ministers from transport sector participated, but as you know, all the ministers of environment participate in the negotiation, not ministers of transport. Basically, if we know the importance of transport sector, occupying 24% of the CO2 emissions in the global context, then we have to raise our voice more clearly and more strongly. So perhaps in preparation of the next COP27, we are also planning to organize several side events in COP in Egypt. So I think overall it's not easy, but working together internationally and also having a relevant governance system inside the government is really important.
Dr. Kim, you are absolutely right there. And certainly, as you say, it is time to raise our voices, especially in light of recent reports like the IPCC, which just released its report, in fact, that says it's now or never to try to stave off climate disaster. So something to think about there and something we'll be talking about further. Now on to COTI President Orr. Tell us a little bit more about the policies in place in developed economies like South Korea, for instance, in its efforts to decarbonize.
Yes, decarbonization decarbonization is one of the most important and imminent issues, national policy issues in Korea. Korean government has announced 40% the emission reductions from 2018 level by 2030 at the COP26 in Glasgow, and also the announced the 2050 carbon neutral. I mean the reaching carbon neutral by 2050. But I think this is the government what is the announcement, but still it is not clear how to achieve this goal through the detailed implementation roadmap or plan, and also the execution, execution system, something like this, you see. Also, the more important is it is still not fully agreed by the entire people the people in general. So for example, the industrial people, they are not very supporting. They are not agree with this plan. So it requires some more time to get some national consensus. Transport sector comes the ranked third largest the emission industry after the energy transformation, which is the largest, and also the manufacturing industrial sector, which is the second largest. The transport is account for around 13.5% of the total emission, which is the transport generate around 98 million tons per year based on the 2018 level. And then mostly produced from the 96.5% produced from the road sector. So we have to reduce the emission from the vehicles very mainly. For example, the passenger car vehicles, passenger cars, or the trucks, something like this. So the passenger transport account for around 65%. Freight transport account for around 35%. But in my understanding, the freight sector is more difficult to reduce than the passenger transport sector, basically. So for the passenger transport, in the past we much put the effort on the modal shift, namely to the promotion of the public transport, and also the transport demand management. But from now on, we have to focus on the rapid mass electrification, mean the deployment of the electric vehicles from now on, something like this. But I think Korea has a strong automobile manufacturing industry, so we have to be very careful about the automobile manufacturing capacity, industrial capacity, and also the barrier is the charging infrastructure, and also the people's the affordability for the electric vehicles, something like this. But in general, I think it is very imperative and also important to prepare a kind of the electrification kind of the ecology market system, something like this, based on some the national subsidy or some tax system, something like this. And for the freight transport, which is more difficult because the freight industry very labor intensive, and also the lacking some competitiveness, something like this. So usually we imagine, we think it's in urban area, small urban trucks, delivery trucks are based on using the battery electric vehicles, trucks. But for the long distance, intercity regional freight movement, we need the alternative biofuel energy or the hydrogen. What is the electric trucks, something like this, and also it is difficult, but we have to try make some modal shift from road to rail freight, something like this. That is also quite important. But in general, like the transport transformation, the decarbonization in the transport decarbonization is also based on the people's agreement, the social agreement, and also the people's consensus. That is very important, I think. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jae-Hako. It's really interesting to hear all those various examples of what South Korea is up to in terms of electrification. Of course, bearing in mind, it does have a huge car industry as well, and they're all going to have to catch up. Now, Xia Hongyang, let's move over to you now. You talked a little bit about the interesting project in Peshawar in Pakistan earlier that, of course, emphasize the decarbonization journey. But how do we overcome other challenges, for instance, around access, equity, gender, and the environment?
Yeah, very good question. Let me just give you a practical sample. This project actually started when I was just posted from my previous role as a transport director for Central West region to the country director of Pakistan. So you can imagine how much effort and time we have been working closely on this project. From the picture here, this is before. This corridor, we don't need to worry about the demands. So Peshawar is a city, the 6th largest city in Pakistan. It's also the culture and the economic hub of KP provinces. Actually, our Deputy Chairman, Mr. Khan, he's from that province, actually. So there are really a lot of challenges here, you can see. So it is really congested, it is unsafe, it is unreliable, it is unpredictable, it is highly polluted. We actually can really never imagine how long it will take for us just to move inches by inches. So you can see there's acute need for us to build a fully functioning public transport system. Let's go to next. That is what we have today after the efforts of the ADB project, Trans-Peshawar system. So this is really a transformational project, but I need to actually put something in the beginning. It is so much challenging to build a project like this scale than the regular project, right? It is, but it is where ADB can actually add a lot of value. For us to do a good transport, urban transport projects, we need to have deep institutional commitments and very strong political support throughout the project cycle and even after the project implementation. We also need to nurture the project readiness, and not just technical readiness, but very much so on the counterpart readiness. We need to have good capacity, good local capacity. We need to focus on human resources, human capital, tap the local talents, very important. For this project to happen, we actually mobilize some Canadian, Pakistan, or anywhere in the world, international experts who are willing to support this project, who are willing to help, who are willing to be a CEO of that kind of challenge to work together with us. So we also need to focus on project selection. We need to filter the projects. We need to see, to really resist the attention saying, look, let's just build the project in 6 months. This is what the local government wanted. We said, no, we have to properly build this project. We need to act, we need to put the best value for money into this project. So you can see this is how this project actually changed the dynamism of this of the city and the provinces. On quality and coverage, we actually supported 27 kilometers of the east-west corridor, the one in the middle. We also supported 83 kilometers of feeder roads, of which I hope it will be realized in the future subsequent projects. This is just the phase 1 of ADB projects. We also ensured the quality and gender elements you can see from this slide. We provided universal access to all. We collect all people, including women and communities, to really provide them the economic and social opportunities. The one changes you can see up front here on the middle upper portion, how male passengers must be cultured enough to let the females and special needs people and aged people to sit in their designated seats, which is really reshaping the culture, behavior, and the future of the province and the city. I have never seen a project is changing the culture every day, every moment. So on safety, you can see how we drastically reduced the fatalities, injuries, crashes, and how much we minimized the greenhouse gas emissions and the pollutions and noises. Within 1 month of the project open to traffic, actually this project was launched on 13 August 2020, 1 day before the Pakistan Independence Day. I remember very clearly, there are a lot of balloons, decorations demonstrated on this corridor. People really love it. So within 1 month, 3 million commuters are using this corridor. So you can see the access. We actually built the Zoom buses, they call it Zoom, ZU. They run 16 hours a day and carry thousands of passengers across 30 BRT stations. And those stations are step-free. You can see the stations here. And then our team worked everything and looked at very, very closely, clearly, and to see whether the quality has built up to our standard, right? So even on digital, this Trans-Java launched, we call it the Zoom car services. The car services are customer very friendly. You can get it conveniently, even for the feeder road services, you can use the BRT corridor. Because of the time limitation, you cannot see how the feeder roads are also being shaped up. We also have bicycle lanes. We also have green spaces. A lot of these things have to be realized in the second phase of ADB project. We hope this can be financed by ADB again. Right. And also you can see if we also regulate through the corridor, the parking policies, and also we built the density. We match the density to the capacity of the BRT system, and also the fuel savings, and more than 8 million people already use this BRT system. I can talk hours and hours, but I want to give others a lot of opportunities. Thank you, over back to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Xia Hong. It was really interesting to hear about that project. And as you say, of course, we can learn about this for many hours, but we are so strapped for time. We just have a little bit over 10 minutes at the moment. So at that point now, I'm going to go on to Mr. Menendez March about New Zealand and its, green economy initiatives and just how critical it is. But I also wanted to ask, seeing as we are running out of time, there's a great question here from Zonnie Woods about how obviously you spoke about the importance of accessibility for those who need it to be served by public transportation. But he'd like you to also talk about the gender related issues that we just heard Xia Hong speak about as well. Gender issues that may have also come up in terms of ensuring the accessibility of transport services for women. So really fascinating there. What do you have to say?
Yeah, I think, Kia ora, Sharonjit, and thank you for that question. one of the best examples I can think of how the intersection of accessibility and relationship to gender has come from a light rail project that has finalized here in Auckland, and the strong feedback we received from advocates on gender justice was pushback on having underground stations, right? Because the research has shown us that with things like light rail, underground stations do make it more unsafe for women and gender minorities. And so one of the things that we've been advocating for is to have surface light rail. Unfortunately, for example, this is one of the areas where we didn't succeed, and the government is doing partially underground. But to me, it's about listening to the research from women and other gender minorities who have told us that, for example, when it comes to a light rail network, surface light rail works better. If it's okay, I'll use the rest of my minute or two to just touch on the broader topic, which I think nicely follows on what your initial comments around the IPCC report, echoing what Indigenous communities and grassroots campaigners have been saying for decades, which is that we need to act now, or we're condemning future generations to the devastation of the climate crisis. I know Aotearoa, in the context of this conversation, is considered a developed country, but when it comes to our transport emissions, we're very much lagging behind in doing our part. Transport accounts for 21% of our annual greenhouse gas emissions, and it is the fastest growing source of emissions in New Zealand. Just between 1990 and 2018, our transport emissions increased by 100. So we've done some work as government to lay the foundations for some action, including what was a really historic Zero Carbon Act that had the consensus of all political parties. And I think that was really important around what previous speakers talked about when it came to that political will. And that is being reflective in some future government budgets, which will aim to reduce emissions. We've also done some legislative action around changing the incentives to import cleaner vehicles, and that addresses the stuff in the video around ensuring that we're shifting toward cleaner electric vehicles. But it's clear that we also need to see a mode shift. And in New Zealand, one of the key things is our current lack of rail infrastructure. We used to be a leader when it came to rail infrastructure during parts of the last century, and we're now lagging behind. And unfortunately, this is an area that I think needs to be part of the decarbonization of our infrastructure, because ultimately the infrastructure that supports cars still contributes a lot to emissions. If we're really serious to reducing our emissions and decarbonizing our transport sector, we also need to invest in rail. In New Zealand, the biggest challenge will be how we fund rail, because our revenue when it comes to transport is very much relying on levies that relate to the use of cars. So we're in a catch-22. We want to reduce the use of cars, but the funding very much comes from the use of cars. So I think I'm really looking forward to what our emission reduction budget and chapters tells us about what we need to do to change the way that we fund transport projects so that we're not entrenching decades worth of polluting infrastructure.
All right, thank you so much for that, Mr. Menendez-March. And we do have just about 5 minutes or so left, and I do want to get to some of those questions from all of you listening in so intently. So thank you for all the marvelous questions. Interesting, Ricardo, you mentioned, of course, the IPCC report, and I touched on it a little bit earlier, just a real big concern about climate disaster that they're warning about. There's a question here by Corny Huesenga asking, what is the view of the panelists on the transport-related recommendations made in the IPCC report on the mitigation of climate change? Would anybody like to have a go at this?
Maybe I can really,
thank you.
Yeah, just very quickly. I think in the past, I have been with the Transport Committee over 20 years in ADB. So in the past, we more focus on just building the infrastructure side. So from IPCC report, we really need to focus on no carbon transport system. You can see from Bashawa also, it's just the services, right, really matters. And then we have to build all the functionalities, all the systems in place during the project implementation, during the design. It is very, very important to cut corners, not to cut corners, especially in developing member countries. There's a lot of budget pressure and then it's squeezed out. But it is important to build the infrastructure, vehicles, operations, regulation, policies, awareness, capacity, and also very much important is all the thematic areas I have mentioned a while ago. Thank you. Over back to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that, Xiaohong. Now, I've got another question here from, well, actually, this is to Dr. Kim. You talked earlier about how collaboration is so essential, and we know that the achievement of these Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement requires cross-sectoral collaboration. So how is the International Transport Forum engaging with other sectors to advance such goals? And perhaps after you answer, I can also open up that question to the others. You know, collaboration is key.
Definitely. In fact, we have a certain consensus that this question is really important. But now, how is the question? So basically, ITF, as you mentioned, ITF is a unique, the global body dealing with all modes of transport. And it's definitely a platform. We are not United Nations regulating the government, the policies. We activate discussions. So recently we launched a DT implement. I put that information on my chatting space. And it's for bringing more concrete the solutions to solve these problems. And we created the sectoral approaches even in the mobility sector. So hard to abate sectors, for example, aviation working group, and also freight working group and maritime working group. And in each working group, there are countries as an advisory the members, board members, and also we invited international organizations to support and join in that the work streams. So basically, we try to connect to non-transport sectors, for example, the trade and urbanism and housing and tourism, and also energy sectors. And without linking transport sector to other sectors, basically, it's not really easy to focus on finding our solutions, because transport sectors traditionally is seen as infrastructure developments, as previous speaker mentioned, but now our questions are becoming more and more complicated. So without knowing energy sectors, we cannot really decarbonize our society and transport. So that's an example, very clear example. So we will continue to reach out to other stakeholders in the global community to find a solution for our society in general, not only for the transport sector.
Yeah, solutions for society in general, that is crucial, isn't it? I was hoping to open that question to some of our other panelists, but I'm afraid we have now run out of time. And I thank you for all the wonderful questions that have been sent through as well. There's a lot of interest in that project in Peshawar. Certainly been interesting to hear a lot about it. And of course, all of the points that all our expert panelists have brought up to us, the interests of having access to transportation for all, for gender, for the underprivileged, really fascinating stuff. And of course, the technology available now to truly decarbonize, electrification, one key factor as well. So thank you all to our esteemed speakers, panel of experts, and to you, the audience, for making this such an insightful session. It's been a great start to the Transport Forum, and I hope you'll tune in to the following sessions where we will bring you more expertise and insight on the key challenges of the sector. And in fact, there is a session starting in just half an hour. I hope you will be able to tune in, and it was all about decarbonization pathways. So please enjoy the rest of our Transport Forum, and thank you once again for tuning in.